there, and welcome to Ancestral Recall. I'm your host, Eli Kaplan, magic historian, linguist, and former writer for Star City Games and The Mothership. Now, Ancestral Recall is a magic YouTube series that does retrospective profiles of magic sets throughout history from the very beginning of the game. We profile the cards that mattered and continue to matter in Standard, Extended, Modern, Limited, EDH, and other fun formats, as well as some of the hidden gems and cool designs that you may appreciate. Someday we'll get up to the modern day, but right now we're in the middle of one of the most powerful sets of all time, Urza's Saga. Last show, we looked at the story, mechanics, and a few of the cycles, but today we're getting deep into the thick of things with card profiles for black, white, blue, and red. We'll save the green artifacts and deep critical analysis for next time. One minor error I'd like to point out from last time is about the Viashino. The Viashino Sandstalker was a big card from Mirage Block played in lots of decks. I remember playing it in Standard. And there was even a legendary Viashino in the set, so they weren't new to Magic as I said the last time. But the Viashino were integrated into the storyline for the most part as a draconic race tied to Shiv, the Land of Dragons. Saga's white cards have a significant theme of hostility towards its enemy colors, so we get vertical cycles with protection, Disciple of Law at common, and Absolute Law and Voice of Law at uncommon. Well, it's sort of a vertical cycle. It never hits the rare spot. Now, against black we get Grace, with the exact same protection numbers. With these and the Rune Cycle, Urza Saga's white cards have even more of a defensive theme than the ones in ABU did. And this was a major shift back from white's aggression in Tempest Block. Then again, every color was quite aggro in Tempest Block. It took Mercadian Masks and Invasion to shift white consistently to a more martial, aggressive-feeling color. If you love life gain and play big fatties in EDH, it's hard not to want to play Angelic Chorus. Tacking on life gain to every creature you add to the table is a major shift. But at the same time, this is going to draw a lot of heat on you for an enchantment that can legitimately add 100 or more life to your total. For a one-shot effect, Congregate is another notorious life gain spell in group games, particularly if there are a lot of token decks at your local table. Routinely gaining 20 or 40 life or 4 mana in group games is obnoxious, but it doesn't have the potential to gain even more like the Chorus does. But regardless, I don't want to promote Congregate. Catastrophe is an easy, fun, powerful mass removal design. Do you like Wrath of God? Do you enjoy Armageddon? These were the big draws to white at the time, since white didn't have much in the way of powerful creatures. Well, for 2 additional mana, Catastrophe lets you pick your reset button of choice. 4 WW lets you destroy either all lands or all creatures. Longtime viewers may recognize that I hate mass land destruction as it leads to non-interactive gameplay. But if you're interested in that kind of thing and want more options, then hey, Catastrophe's a fine choice. White is the color best at pumping up its army consistently. The first card to do so was Crusade from ABU, along with its enemy counterparts, Bad Moon. Arabian Nights Jihad was a more conditional version that offered a bigger offensive bonus. But Urza Saga offered the cleanest alternative with Glorious Anthem. It's simple. All the guys on your team get +1/+1. Artifact black, red, green, blue, whatever, it doesn't matter. It just gets a bump up to 3 mana, and hey, it only benefits you. Glorious Anthem ended up getting reprinted a bunch of times in core sets thanks to its effective, fair, clear execution. While Transformation is more of a blue thing these days, white had the first instant speed spell to alter creatures' base stats and lose abilities with Humble. The flavor concept is you cow a creature into insignificance and submission with your divine power for a short period. This was very much in flavor for Sarah. This spell got color shifted into blue with Planar Chaos with Avenize, and now frequently gets reprinted in core sets as Turn to Frog. The original concept of changing a creature's base stats, however, comes from Arabian Nights' Sorceress Queen. There's more goofy fun flavor in the blue versions, but the color pie does logically support the awe and majesty of Humble. Opal Titan's a good example of a sleeping card. It waits until your opponent casts a creature, then becomes a 4/4 with protection from that creature's colors. In today's more creature-centered Magic, Opal Titan will be a powerhouse, and embodies the passive-aggressive element of white that Mark Rosewater calls Federation-like tendencies. But since Saga Block had many archetypes that didn't rely on creatures to win, this card failed to take off in Standard. One of my absolute favorite casual cards is Pariah, a spell that couples damage prevention and creature removal all in one. If you play this on your opponent's creature, that will force them to find a way to sacrifice it, attack in the combat that deals no damage to you and kills the enchanted creature, or they have to disenchant the aura. And if you play this on a creature with protection from the right color, this can utterly shut down the monocolored deck. You can even slap it on an indestructible guy, yours or your opponent's, and just laugh off damage for the rest of the game. Pariah is one of the most deceptively powerful auras ever printed in white. I really regret not having this in my cube at the moment. We get to see Serra's Sanctum's artificial nature reflected in the card Planar Birth, an extremely unusual sorcery that returns all lands to the battlefield from the graveyard. Now, this is more of a sideboard card against land destruction, and dabbles in quite different space than Ravnica's far more popular Life from the Loam, because it puts the lands directly into play instead of back into your hand. Of course, Life from the Loam decks do all sorts of tricks with lands when they are in your hand, especially with cycling lands, so Planar Birth is actually far less abusable. Serra Avatar is the biggest creature in the set, and has been a popular casual card for years. This is essentially an updated version of ABU's Personal Incarnation, a avatar of you, the player, but with a much bigger upside. Serra Avatar is also the first creature printed with the Shuffle into Library anti-reanimation rider that so many giant fatties have come with over time, such as Darksteel Colossus, or Emrakul the Aeon's Torn. But the Avatar also represents the rebirth of white in this regard. The last white card to talk about is Worship. Worship is an aggravating card that drove many a black, green, or red player to frustration since they had their opponent dead to rights, but just couldn't find the solution of killing all their creatures so that they give up the ghost. This is the white version of Lich, representing immortality. Now, Worship is merely an enchantment form of Ali from Cairo from Arabian Nights, but since it's not a creature itself, Worship is far more resilient. I used to love this card in standard control decks, but for acknowledging how little fun it is for opponents, I chose not to include it in cubes or EDH. Those of you who were paying attention during the Eldrazi winter this last year know that this was also a quite viable sideboard option to take care of Eldrazi decks just by hanging in the game. Hold up, wait a minute. That's what Arcane Laboratory does, limiting all players to just one spell per turn. Combo players loathe this enchantment. Storm is never going to mean anything with this on the table. Any deck that relies on casting more than one spell per turn is going to get ruined by Arcane Laboratory. A few years later, Wife permanently got dibs on this type of effect with Rule of Law, and the color pie has never looked back. If you'd like to find a refuge to escape the storm in, well, just head to the Arcane Laboratory. Okay guys, story time. I've alluded in previous shows to my favorite deck of all time, which is Old Extended's Turboland combo deck, pioneered by Magic Hall of Famer Zvi Moshkowitz. Turboland is a deck that goes into infinite turns with Gaia's Blessing and Time Warps, backed up with counter magic and a massive card draw engine through Horn of Greed and Exploration, so you can play multiple lands and just keep filling up your hand. We'll tackle Exploration in the next show. But anyway, back in 2001, this deck was quite popular thanks to its fellow adoption by Satoshi Nakamura, one of Japan's first Magic pros, one of its first champions, and the designer of Cardfight Vanguard. Now, Nakamura is also well known for his collection of eccentric hats. Yeah, his are way more outlandish than mine. Anyway, way back in Extended Grand Prix Sendai in 2001, I was playing this Turboland deck and ran into not one, but 3 mirror matches, and I won all of them handily. And most of the time, Nakamura was hanging at the table, standing behind his disciples, watching me trounce them. Now, how did I school this guy and his fans? With back to basics. Nakamura's disciples were running 20 non-basic lands, and I could sideboard into Back to Basics, one of the most brutal anti-non-basic hosers in all of Magic. It's very simple, elegant, and brutal. When Back to Basics is in play, non-basic lands don't untap on your untap step. Anyway, Nakamura's disciples were splashing red for Obliterate, trying to clear the board, but I managed to pin down their mana bases and take them down handily. I could untap 8 to 10 lands, and they would get 1 or 2. Nakamura talked to me afterwards in the third mirror match, and in my broken Japanese, I told him that I was more of a Zvi Moshkwitz fan, but I got Nakamura to sign one of my Horns of Greed anyway. Sadly, that day I went 6-0-3, which was just shy of the cut to day 2, and it was my opponent's fault for playing so slow. Believe me, I played that deck at a quite brisk pace. I play in a very timely fashion generally. It was the first time I didn't pick up a match loss on day 1 of a Grand Prix, but I still missed day 2 with a straight cut to top 64. Now, I fixed that a decade later by going 9-0 in 2015's GP Atlantic City, but I really wanted to make day 2 with Turboland. Oh well. You know, I have another great story from this GP. I'll share it another day. Long story short, try out Back to Basics to hose those non-basic land lovers. One of the more enduring designs of Urza Saga is Confiscate, a simple aura. You enchant a permanent and control it. This is the most versatile stealing card in the game, though its 6 mana cost is definitely steep. The elegant thing about Confiscate is that it enchants permanents, so this can work with Planeswalkers. If Wizards ever happens to create a new permanent type, well, you'll be able to seal that with Confiscate too. Another very frustrating design is Exhaustion, a sorcery which keeps a player's permanents from untapping for a turn. Various tempo-oriented combo decks have used this throughout Magic's history. I've used Winter Orb countless times, but shutting down all untaps altogether is not my cup of tea. Blue mages combine this spell with Mana Short to keep opponents from doing anything over multiple turns. This wasn't the first prison archetype, but it definitely was a popular one. You can share the wealth with Gilded Drake. This 2-drop lets you take the best creature in play and use it while they get a 3/3 flyer in exchange. This card can ruin friendships, but it is so efficient and powerful in what it does in group games that you may not mind. Some cruel players even use repeatable bounce effects to return the Drake for grand thefts. This is an absolute staple in EDH and fully merits its high price tag. The most famous creature of Urza Saga is Morphling, a canny shapeshifter that can dodge spells, untap, take to the air, and juxtapose its stats. I've used various means of increasing its stats to have 11-2 and even 23-1 flying shrouded Morphlings in play thanks to various shenanigans. I'm not exaggerating there. Having 5 different activated abilities on a single creature made board states quite complex, but Morphling was a crowd pleaser. I don't think there's a creature out there that I've killed more players with. And yes, this was originally slated to be a reprint of Clone, but the rules officials didn't want to go back to copying cards at the time, so the Morphling that we see here was a last-minute replacement. I can't complain about the substitution, though. The Morphling has been a very popular card, so that there are variants in other colors, such as Thornling and Torchling. And yes, in the unsets, we also have Greater Morphling, which is just, it has the kitchen sink on it. I'm skipping over the free spells for the most part, but the fact that Rewind, the set's common counter spell, was the only free spell to see several reprints makes it quite noteworthy. As a purely reactive spell, Rewind's use of the free mechanic actually hinders degeneracy in an environment rather than promoting it. So if you'd like to experiment with free spells, yeah, Rewind's a good place to start. Show and Tell is a symmetrical spell that lets each player dump a permanent into play for free. Vintage and Legacy players use this to drop Emrakul, the Aeon's Torn, or Omniscience into play. That's cruel. Needless to say, this card is quite broken, as unfair things happen when you don't respect the mana system. This is a less complicated, cleaner version of Legends Eureka. Though to be honest, I don't know why blue gets free spells rather than green. Green is more oriented towards mana discounts and production, so I would think that it would work the mana system a bit more logically than blue. Blue gets to draw more stuff, not cheat it out. But then again, Urza Saga was emblematic of blue at the time in that, well, blue was the best color of Magic. Time Spiral was a combination of free mana and Time Twister, and created numerous broken combo decks. And there's no surprise that this was one of the first 2 cards to get the standard Banhammer. But many others soon followed. It's also the name of my favorite set in Magic, though I doubt Wizards had any intention of naming future sets when they created this card. Windfall is another broken combo enabler, especially when you have lands that tap for 6 or more mana. I have to assert again that Saga's combo decks were completely bonkers, way worse than Affinity, and Windfall was a major component of so many of these combos. Diabolic Servitude is a sweet version of Animate Dead. Yes, the spell costs 4, which is double the cost of the original, and it only lets you target creatures in your own graveyard. But Diabolic Servitude comes with a massive upside. Every time this enchantment leaves play for the graveyard, it comes back to your hand. The creature it enchanted gets exiled, so you can't reanimate the same creature repeatedly, but with the potential to grab creatures repeatedly, yeah, this is a powerful card. Urza Saga has quite a few enchantments that return to your hand if they're put in the graveyard from play, though many of them are rather small in effect. This one isn't. Diabolic Servitude is one of my absolute favorite cards in Cube, and it needs to be tried. One of the great safety valves against powerful spell decks, Duress combines information access and targeted discard at an extremely affordable price. It's lost some luster as creatures have gained prominence in recent years, but this spell still does a ton of work against numerous archetypes, particularly against counter-magic decks. Many metagames have had Duress as the single best black spell in Standard. This is the best test spell that will let you know if the coast is clear. As a matter of fact, Duress is just a solid benchmark of figuring out whether a 2-player constructed format is more creature-oriented or non-creature-oriented. The more creature-oriented it is, the less likely Duress will be popular in deck lists, and vice versa. Duress has seen a ton of reprints, and it's not hard to see why. And yes, while Duress shines most brightly in control mirrors, it is also a popular spell in aggro black decks as well. You can protect your threats by preemptively getting rid of your opponent's method of reacting. Just like Show and Tell, Exhume claims to be fairly priced because it's symmetrical, letting both players reanimate a creature from their graveyards. But proper planning has shown that Exhume is not fair. The most obvious partner for this card is Odyssey's Entomb, which puts the optimal creature directly in your yard. I wonder if the rhyme is what made this obvious. Entomb, Exhume, yeah. Before Invasion, it was quite unusual to see decks with more than 2 colors. Once the original dual lands rotated out, there weren't that many good mana fixers outside green. So Persecute started off extremely strong, since many players were running 1 or 2 color decks. Hitting 4 or 5 cards was not uncommon, especially when Dark Ritual powered out a Persecute on turn 2. Later printings in more gold-focused and artifact-focused metagames lacked the punch it had the first time around. If you're looking for the most format-warping limited common of all time, there's quite a few choices to argue over, such as Sparksmith in Onslaught, but Pestilence has to be in on this discussion. Originally printed in ABU as a common, it showed up again in Urza Saga, and the smaller creatures of the format made this a first pick. Black was easily the most powerful draft color until Urza's Legacy and Destiny shook up the format. Pestilence is a huge factor in Black's triple Saga limited performance. The most broken black card in Urza Saga is easy to spot, Yawgmoth's Will. It costs 3 to play, but when you can cast all your spells from the graveyard that turn, it's so easy to get out of hand. Did you just use a Dark Ritual to play this? Yep, you get to recast it. Before you played Yawgmoth's Will, you just used Hurkyl's Recall to reset all your mana artifacts. Can you replay all those artifacts and get even more mana? You got it! This is the most powerful spell in Vintage Storm decks, and has a healthy track record of blowouts during its standard tenure as well. The force of Yawgmoth's will wrecks players. When we look at the landmark red cards, red has a heck of a powerful common, Arc Lightning. This sorcery distributes 3 points of damage as you like. Red was already at a high point coming off Tempest Block, but Arc Lightning made a 3-mana burn spell quite attractive. In the limited format with far smaller creatures than today, Arc Lightning was insane value. Red occasionally gets big sweepers dealing damage to creatures and sometimes players, almost always at rare, and generally there's 1 per set, if that. Urza's Saga featured 3. Oh my gosh. The first is Crater Hellion, a 6-mana 6/6 that dealt 4 power to each other creature if it hit play. That sounds overpowered, right? A sweeper that also happens to be a good win condition? Well, not so fast. Crater Hellion also features Echo, so if you'd like to get beat down for the win, you need to invest another 6 mana on your next turn. 4 damage doesn't sound all that big by 2015's creature standards. It can't even kill a Siege Rhino, for crying out loud. But in 98, when creature stats were considerably smaller by average, this was a very effective card. And yet, Crater Hellion wasn't powerful enough for Kai Bude, one of the 2 greatest players of all time, to use it in his 1999 World Championship deck. No, Kai wanted the other red sweeper. Kai wanted Wildfire. Wildfire is a 4/RR sorcery and also deals 4 damage to each creature. It also requires each player to sacrifice 4 lands. Now, in a format with artifacts like Grim Monolith, Worn Power Stone, and Fire Diamond, it's very easy to set up Wildfires on turn 4 where you sacrifice 2 lands and have 5 or 6 mana left over. Note that Kai's main win condition in this deck, Urza's Destiny's Covetous Dragon, has 5 toughness. This is Wildfire's highest profile finish, though it remained a viable strategy in Standard for years to come thanks to 2 reprints and core sets. This was the red replacement for Ice Age's Yokel Helps. Oh, and there was an Instant Speed Earthquake, Fault Line, and Urza Saga. Man, I'll tell you, red did not like creatures, that's for sure. Just so many sweepers. Urza Saga also represents a high watermark in power up to that point for red's most prominent tribe, Goblins. Goblins got a free tutor for another Goblin card with Goblin Matron. Cantrips usually cost 2 more than the usual card, but tutoring for the Goblin card of your choice and putting it directly into your hand, that's pretty incredible. And that card advantage was highly relevant because Goblin players were getting to play their little guys for free. How's that, you say? Well, Goblin Lackey. Goblin Lackey is the most powerful 1-drop Goblin ever printed. Yes, it's more powerful than Mock Fanatic or Goblin Guide. When Lackey hit play and connected on turn 2, it would let you play a Goblin from your hand for free. That could be a Goblin King, or Goblin Settlers, or a Goblin Matron setting up another bigger Goblin on the next turn. The potential was off the charts. Here's another update card, Shivan Hellkite. While the Hellkite is slower and can't deal as much damage as the classic Shivan Dragon, it does have the distinct ability to shell out mana to burn small creatures out. While Hellkite didn't have a lot of tournament success, it was one of the early chase cards of the set. A big theme of Urza's Saga is bending the mana system. And while the free spells were in blue, red got another critical card breaking the mana system, Sneak Attack. One of the most powerful red enchantments ever printed, this lets you pay a single red to dump a creature into play for a turn, giving you 1 shot to attack with it. For some creatures, a single attack is all that you need, like Emrakul, the Aeon's Torn, or Gristlebrand, which lets you draw new hands. And those are merely the worst case scenarios. There are so many other ways to break Sneak Attack. If you have a particular favorite, feel free to mention it in the comments. And that's going to bring us to a close today. Next time, we'll look at the artifacts and green spells and give Urza Saga a final verdict. So if you enjoyed this show, please let me know by leaving a comment, and believe me, it really does help if you hit those like and share buttons. Subscribe if you haven't already, and why not check out my older shows? I'd appreciate it. Thanks for watching. This is Eli Kaplan for Ancestral Recall, signing off. Good games, and good luck.